Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your resilient host,
Brian. Hi, how's it going?
Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, how are you?
Good, how are you? Excited to be here, excited to be back in BBHQ.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe we just left our house for 2 weeks while not recording Buffy Boys.
Well, it's object permanence, but we're not recording, we're not really here.
It's true. Okay, let's do the Buffy summary. So this episode is Selfless. It's season 2, episode 5. It was first aired on October 22nd, 2002. It was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Lessons, and it was written by Drew Goddard. Notable writer in many ways. He writes 5 episodes for this season of Buffy, but otherwise hasn't written beforehand. This is his first script he's ever written, which is absolutely mad. He was... Sorry, my handwriting, I'll explain in a second, but my notes are not very legible right now. He was nominated for a Hugo Award for Conversations with Dead People alongside the other 4 writers for that episode. Mm-hmm. He also wrote for Angel, Alias, Lost, and he created the 2015, I want to say, Daredevil. I can't remember the year that came out.
It's around then.
Yeah. He also directed the first episode of The Good Place, which is kind of cool. Notably, he wrote Cloverfield, the movie. He wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods, which is obviously a Joss Whedon produced product. And then he wrote The Martian, which was an Oscar nominated.
Oh yeah.
And he adapted it, so he got a nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. And he wrote and directed the Bad Times at the El Royale. Which we saw as well, which I only noted when I was writing this down. I was like, Bad Times at the El Royale. And I was like, what's wrong with me about that? And it's because it's Bad Times at the Royal.
Yeah. That's pretty good, yeah. Quite a eclectic career. There's no through line there, really.
Not to be rude, but it's kind of Joss Whedon-y.
But The Martian and stuff?
The Martian is an outlier for sure. It's an unusual one. Cloverfield... Unfortunately, probably, he also produced the 10 Cloverfield Lane and the Cloverfield Paradox, which is I think I'd want that taken off my, 10 Cloverfield Lane, great movie. Cloverfield Paradox, I believe to be absolute trash. Mm. Anyway, here's your actual Buffy Ann summary. When C8 Swedish peasant, 8th century?
8th century.
When 8th century Swedish peasant Odd turns her unfaithful lover Olaf into a troll, the Hoffman recruits her as the vengeance demon Anya, who causes the 1905 Russian Revolution. She sings of her love for Xander. When she summons a spider and kills 12 students, Buffy decides she must die, in spite of Xander's pleas. Willow summons the Hoffman and Anya pleads for the lives of the students. He sets the price of a vengeance demon's life, and she accepts. He kills her friend Halfric to punish her. That was very confusing.
Very chronological.
Not really. She sings... She did sing in the past, and that was a flashback, but you need to frame these things as a flashback.
Brian, that's what chronological is. He started with the 8th century, and then the Russian Revolution, and then earlier last season, and now the present day.
That's true.
So let's scoot on over gently, gingerly, to the primary care centre in the Bronze, and we will, So what's been going on with you, Brian?
So last week I had to take a week off. I did tweet that I had to take a week off because I had emergency surgery.
Maybe, perhaps a content warning here, Brian, for some personal injury.
Yeah. One of the personal injury for sure. One of the phrases I used, and I will use because it's quite evocative. My friend yesterday, Kira, was telling me that she has been haunted by the phrase for the last week, which I'm like, great, perfect, noted for every future retelling of this event. But basically. Last Sunday night, which was not 2 days ago or 3 days ago, depending on when you're listening to this, or
could be years ago, depending on when you're listening to it.
Who fucking knows? The week before, Joel accidentally closed a door on my fingers, which I do blame him for, and he should feel bad. But it meant that the tip of my right ring finger got severed, completely amputated. Not any of the bone. The bone was slightly fractured, but the bone was exposed. I looked down after this happened and I was like, oh my God, my finger has fucking exploded. Mm-hmm. And that was quite distressing. But then you called the ambulance. We were walking around, and I think in your shock you saw on the door frame the meat of my finger left there, and you're like, I don't know what to do with that. I found it a few seconds later and then stuck it back on. We got the ambulance arrived, got brought off to the A&E, which is the ER for Americans. In the middle of the night, this is about 1 o'clock or 1:30, and I stayed there overnight, and I ended up spending a day. Basically, I was there essentially until 2 p.m. that day, and they were like, "Oh, we'll fix it for you by the end of the day." And they got to the end of the day, they looked at it, and they were like, "Oh, this is much worse than we thought. So you're gonna have to come back tomorrow." And they brought me back in for surgery, in which they had to shorten my finger by about half an inch because of, I don't know, whatever, because of the way that the skin was lost, or the flesh was lost, or the meat was lost. And that was gross, the surgery. I had a local anesthetic, so it meant that I was able to hear everything happening. There was lots of like clipping and grating, which was
rasping. Bone rasping.
I would say no rasping. There was nothing like delicate sounding. It was all really determined, which is it has haunted me since. So yeah, like last week we were like, we could have recorded the podcast, but also absolutely fucking not. Yeah. Because I think
even with the content warning, I don't know when people listen to this, maybe listen to it when they're trying to sleep early in the morning. We really went right into this.
Sorry.
The most horrific thing we ever talked about on this podcast is something that happened to us in real life.
Yeah, my finger got flayed.
Yeah, and actually, it was funny that beforehand, I was talking to a woman in the shops, and I was just like, I wish Brian could just stop sticking his fingers in everything.
What?
It's a vengeance demon. Bit.
I don't get it.
I wish Brian could stop.
Oh, sorry. I get it now. Okay.
About the episode of Buffy.
I see it now. Yeah. Anyway, that's what happened to my finger. That's why we weren't here last week. And I now I'm not able to use my right hand at all at the moment. So my handwriting is atrocious. I'm learning to write with my left hand.
I need to put this on record. Your handwriting on the first day that you wanted to write with your left, and I actually think if I was in your position, I just would stop writing. But
I keep a diary, so I wanted to not.
But your handwriting on the first day with your left hand, which is your non-dominant hand, was far and away better than my regular handwriting has ever been. And now after a couple of days, you have essentially indistinguishable handwriting. So what the fuck?
I have to write so slowly and so deliberately. Doing everything with my left hand is so difficult. I spent the first couple of days with my trying to work with my mouse on the right hand side still, and just like leaning over to like pull it around. That's and then silly. I was like, what am I doing? And I moved over to my left hand side, and it's easier, but still like everything is deliberate, you know?
I feel so lefty.
I feel everything requires like so much deliberate thought behind, I'm going to move it 5 degrees to the left. Anyway, so said we'd also talk about a couple of media things, because that's what we do like to do. So in the last couple of weeks, we've been rewatching, kind of coincidentally, I Will Destroy You, which I watched 6 or 7 months ago.
I May Destroy You?
I May Destroy You, yeah. We Will Destroy You, I think is the name of a band, and that's why I was getting mixed up. But we started watching I May Destroy You. I watched it in January or December of last year, maybe November. And I probably talked about it on the podcast at the time. I fucking loved it. We started watching it a couple of weeks ago, just out of, I think what you said was something very nice actually. You were like, oh, Brian, if you recommended this, then it's clearly good, and I'm not sure why I've been sleeping on it. And I was like, yeah, let's watch it. So we've been watching that. But more importantly, Michaela Cole, who is I'm not sure if she directed it. She certainly created it, wrote it, and stars in it. Has just won an Emmy last night for best
writing in a limited edition series or limited release series.
Exactly. And she's the first black woman ever to have won it.
Yeah, and she's dedicated to everyone who's ever been sexually assaulted, which is the topic of the show.
Very, very, very heavily the topic of the show. She's an inspiration. She's wonderful. She's funny and just wonderful.
Firebrand, absolutely firebrand.
Just insanely talented.
Yeah. So you've talked about it before, but I've been really enjoying it. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly relatable almost, even though it's not necessarily the people in it are people who are like me, but there's something genuine and relatable I would say about it. It's actually quite fun and funny, even though the subject matter is so heavy at times. I think it's a tour de force.
It's funny in the way that life is funny, in the sense that the kind of silly jokes you have with friends translate into this, and yourself, when trauma happens, you don't stop with those silly jokes, or some people do, but a lot of people don't. And you kind of, that translates so well. They feel like real living characters in the show, and it's funny because they get into some satirical or magical realist moments in the show as it goes on, and it doesn't take away from that at all.
Yeah.
It's a tour de force. It is
short as well.
It's short, but it's if you liked Fleabag, this is chef's kiss.
Absolutely.
And the other thing we were watching was Sex Education.
Yeah, so
Sex Education's back, season 3.
It is, and we've definitely talked about Sex Education before, and there's just so much to recommend. I would start off with saying I actually wish I don't do as much as you do, but I did look at the reviews for it and the Rotten Tomato rating and all that, and it's just gone up and up. And I think it's like 100% or something close to it for this season. It is I think potentially the best text that has ever been on television about actual sexual health and about sexual experiences and like the plurality of different experiences in it.
Other ones being, kind of like if you kind of list along your side, your Masters of None, or I'm trying to think what else like deals head on with sex as a topic.
Yeah,
not a huge amount.
It is. All 3 seasons so far have been very different. I started out with it was very.
Sorry, I said Master of None.
I meant Master of Sex.
Masters of Sex.
Okay,
yeah.
Master of None maybe a little bit, but the early seasons were very premisey, and our premise is great. Here's this premise, but this season I think has been really enjoyable because you can almost say it hasn't had a through line of it has a little bit. It has a plot. It has a little bit of an arc, but. What they started out with a couple of likable characters, and Gillian Anderson kind of playing a powerful role in it as well as a sex therapist. They have managed to make the entire ensemble cast so likable and so engaging and so diverse that they really just center different episodes, not like performatively, but just in different places, and it's always fun to watch. And there
was a scene in the episode we watched last night which was 3 black characters, one of whom was non-binary, and you're kind of like, oh, is this like, just, kind of this feels almost intentional. And it's like, no, that's on me that I read that as intentional. 3 black people existing in the same show, getting to talk to each other. Like, what the fuck? Why isn't this happening all the time in every show? But it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And even taking that example, I think that their characters are so individually unique that there's no sense of them filling archetypes or stereotypes or anything like that. But also from like the queer representation, it's one of these things that flies under the radar because like, oh yeah, this gay character thing or whatever. Like there's a massive plurality of different queer experiences in it, and different issues, and not even issues, but just different experiences that just don't ever really necessarily get talked about. And and I actually feel season on season they've updated to the zeitgeist in quite a good way. Like 2 things I noticed from this season was much more casual reference to characters as queer as opposed to LGBT, which is more in line with how things have trended over the last couple of years. Especially youth. And also references to PrEP in terms of HIV and just being like, well, PrEP's there. And, there was a great exchange with a sexual health nurse saying it, where it's like, well, if you're practicing safe sex as a gay couple, you're unlikely to catch HIV. If you are concerned, PrEP can prevent that. If you do catch it, there's medications that means that you won't be able to transmit it and be able to live a healthy life. So update your thinking about it. And I was like, yeah, that's like some people watching this
have heard this for the first
time. Yeah, and also it's visually vibrant and it's just fun to watch.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, so like I think we've
one of the things that I would note as well is that it portrayed a sex scene with a disabled person who is I think probably paraplegic technically, in the sense that he has no feeling below his chest, but his arms are also quite disabled. Oh, that's probably not a great way to put it. His arms.
He's limited mobility.
He's limited mobility in his arms, but they showed a sex scene and him kind of not explaining it to his partner in the situation, but like kind of communicating, here's what is sexual to me in the situation, and here's how I can come, here's how I can enjoy myself, here's how I can pleasure you. And it was tender and sweet and funny, and like it's just like it kind of brings to mind, it's like, how many times have I seen sex scenes with disabled people in media? I can think of like literally 2 other times, one of which is Friday Night Lights, and the other one is The Sessions, which is a great movie with Bonnie Tyler, I think, actually. But no, Bonnie Hunt, a very different person. But it's so unusual to see that. And it's so fucked because like there are so many disabled people out there having sex on a consistent basis and never get to see themselves on screen because what they're seen as being like a fetish at best often, and I think that it shouldn't be looked at worse. And it's just like, fuck you, like, you know, do better than that. Disabled people have sex all the time.
I've actually coincidentally been listening to a lot of content from disabled sex activists and educators over the last year, and although I can't speak to it firsthand, I found it was all quite in line with what they have been espousing as like, this is how you should be acting and representing. And what I can speak to personally in the show, I've often felt like, yeah, this actually does represent me. This sounds like people I know, and they manage to do all the, you know, it's like when you do something well, it immediately answers any of the criticisms people have of like, well, you can't have a show that's educational without it being boring and all that. It's like, you absolutely can, just try harder.
Yeah, actually, there was one scene in season 2 which actually bothered me a little tiny bit, which was a pansexual person describing themselves, their sexuality as like hearts, not parts, which I always find like an unusually dismissive way to describe other sexualities, if you get me, as in like, oh, I'm interested in hearts, not like, you know, genitals, and then other people, like, you know, silly people are interested in genitals, which I think is like, anyway, I don't think it's intended as such, but I was like, oh, that's a little tiny bit of, and I was like, that's notable that that's the only thing that I was like, hey, that's not chill.
Like a couple of points on that. One is that there's obviously the inherent tension of whether that portrays other sexualities, in particular bisexuality, as being binary or being restrictive in some way, or very sex oriented. But also, I think it's very important to remember that with this kind of stuff, that is the opinion of the character.
Yeah, that's very true.
And also, are we 100% certain that you're thinking of sex education and not Big Mouth?
No, it is. No, as Big Mouth also had an issue with pan representation. And
with a very similar conversation.
Yeah, no, but like, so the thing is here, I'm not taking the issue with this in terms of how it's communicating pansexuality.
No, but just if you're remembering it,
this is me saying that like I didn't like it as a non-pansexual person. But the Big Mouth had an issue that there was no controversy about this sex education scene. I like Googled it online when it irked me in a tiny when I Googled it. But no one was really complaining about it, as they shouldn't. It wasn't a big deal. But Big Mouth really did fuck up with that, and then he apologized. So.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, we're going on too long with this, but...
So speaking of people who have a big mouth...
Who, Anya?
Anya?
Does she?
No, she's irksome, and she asks many questions that aren't responded to. But no, I say that in jest. In this episode, we've an Anya-centric episode. I've been looking forward to this episode, actually. I remember this my first watch through of season 7. I thought it was quite horrific at the time. I feel much more inured to it now, but like there was a real sense of like oh god.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I'll start off I won't bury the league on this. I think we thought this was great. I think I was I thought it would be a good episode, but I was like, no, this is it's some of the best what Buffy does, in a sense. It has a really focused plot, a really focused purpose. It had a couple of really tight performances from two of the leagues. So obviously with Giles wasn't in this at all.
No.
Yeah, I know. I realized that I hadn't even thought about him.
Giles has been out of it since Willow left.
It's true. It's just because he did the voiceovers.
He doesn't actively return to the show until the potentials are all kind of gathering, there's that whole question mark around, because there's a couple of scenes where he's sending potentials back and it looks like he gets killed, but he doesn't actually. So
yeah, 100%. Some great acting between Sarah Michelle Gellar and Emma Caulfield, and it all pays off on character arcs that have been built up very organically over a long period of time.
I would say Alison Hannigan in there as well for a great performance.
So really the tension of the plot, as you mentioned in the episode, is that we have Anya coming to terms. She actually does something which is murderous and horrific as a demon. She slaughters 12 frat boys.
The context of which has been that for the last couple of weeks in Buffy, there's been a lot of chiding of Anya by Halfrick and just pressure to like do better as a vengeance demon. It's kind of seen that she's kind of failing, especially with that guy who she turned into a worm and then turned him back. So yeah, the opening scene is Willow saying that she's going back to college, and Dawn saying, listen, you just have to fit in and just be normal, which of course sets the tone for the episode. It's all around social expectations, exclusion, and self, which obviously is like Anya's struggle in this episode. But and then Anya, they're like, oh, we need to go get in touch with Anya. I don't think she's doing great. And then she's sitting in a pool of blood while around with all these frat boys around her, saying, she says, "Oh God, what have I done?" Yeah, which you said was a bit on the nose. I think it's fine.
Like, it is fine. I'm holding it to a high standard. It's just, it was a bit like, Yeah, actually, I think in retrospect, now I've seen the whole episode, I think it works because she doesn't actually express regret at all for the rest of the episode. Do you know what I mean? Like the rest of the episode is her like
Getting there.
trying to deny the fact that she did something wrong. So having her by herself say that, actually, I think
works.
Yeah, because it shows you that that's running under the current. So the couple of really interesting threads through this episode, and Xander's also here, but we really, it's Anya centric. It's about how we get from some flashbacks to, as you mentioned, her in C8, as a, what was it, Swedish? Is she Swedish? Yeah. Megan, and we see her ex-lover from the previous episode, Olaf, and basically how she became beholden to the Hoffren as a vengeance demon, and counterpointed with her in the modern day. So maybe we'll talk about that. There's a couple of scenes there. There's, I think, really the Russian Revolution scene is whatever, but
we can just ignore that. Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing that is useful from that is her in that scene being very clear that she is the work. Like that she doesn't want other things from life. That she is committed. That was the contrast there. But in terms of her backstory, and then the later scene where we have the flashback to Once More Feeling, how did you feel about those?
Yeah, so I thought the Swedish stuff didn't sit great with me until the Hoffren entered, personally. I do love the idea that like Anya, as odd by name, odd by nature, is a social outcast before she becomes a demon. She's...
Do you like that?
I like it. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting note to her character. It's suggesting that she's like a bit too smart for the situation, a bit too straightforwardly spoken. And it's nice to think that like this is her character as opposed to the implications of being a demon for so long, because it kind of calls into question the way everyone's treated her as being like, this like kind of reformed ex-demon, she doesn't know any better, etc. And she's like, no, this is just her, actually, which I think is interesting.
Because she's never said really, I don't understand things because I'm a demon. Everyone, like, and she's obviously said she hasn't been human for a long time, but I think the assumption that the reason she doesn't understand things is because she's a demon, it came from other people.
Yeah,
that's been projected onto her. So yeah, I think there's something interesting there. I think that the kind of grainy flashback period footage-esque thing of them in 8th century Sweden, it's fine. It really has a touch of Angel about it, and a touch of like, bad sitcom,
a bad sitcom bit.
Yeah, it has like again like the Joss Whedon comedy styling kind of thing where it goes a bit too. It's a whole bit that doesn't necessarily age as well as the individual lines. It feels like it's less. Less punning Slayer, more Dr. Horrible sing-along blog a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But no, it's absolutely fine. I think the scenes with the Hoffren are good there. I think
the point where the Hoffren, she says to the Hoffren, and the book Why Buffy Matters by Rhonda Wilcox goes into this a good bit, because there's a whole chapter on naming in Buffy and kind of like how characters get their names and stuff. But she goes into how Anya specifically, like the stuff around her name in this episode is quite interesting, because you have obviously Anya's original name being Odd, ODD, very obvious there. But then after that you have the exchange where Anya says, I am Odd, and Hoffman says, are you? I'm afraid you don't see your true self. You're Anyanka, etc., etc. And then Anya says, why do you keep calling me that? My name is Odd. And then de Havilland says, perhaps, but Anyanka is who you are. And then later on in the episode, when de Havilland nearly says what Anya's original name was, where he says, like, I can't even remember what the interaction is.
He says to Xander, Xander's like, stop calling her
Anyanka. Her name is Anya. Yeah.
And he says, like, as a historical note.
Actually, yeah, I have it here. Actually, funny historical sidebar. Her original name was, and then Anya says immediately, I want to take it back. So it's a suggestion that, like, he has attributed this self and this personality to her, which has been prescribed for her. And she needs to now determine who she is through returning that name and coming back to herself and finding herself again.
Obviously, de Havilland calls her Anya at the end of the episode.
Yeah. And in the episode, there's just a lot of situations in which Anya is very clearly, like, has lost herself, and it's very, very interesting in that way. Sorry, I'm not sure how. So I found that interesting. I thought the interaction between de Havilland and Anya, where she kind of says, or they're kind of having the banter of, oh, how did you get him to turn into a troll? And she's like, yeah, I used some of the else wood or something like that. And I found that like really well rattled off. I thought that Emma Caulfield did a great job there. I found it quite enjoyable.
Also, the implication that she knew some stuff before, I think the episode really serves to like give her back some intrinsic competency that's not just demon related.
She was actually quite a good witch essentially.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. And I think what it kind of communicates is. It kind of communicates in a slightly sad way that I don't think anyone in the Scooby Gang really knows all that much about her.
Yeah.
Compared to what we learn about other people.
Yeah. I thought it was awkward in the episode where Xander says, why would you want to kill one of your best friends to Buffy? And Buffy kind of like looks at him like, awkward because, Anya's not one of my best friends realistically. Like, I don't really know her.
Kind of your girlfriend is what she was, yeah.
And that's kind of like the whole, like, I was like, oh, is that an intentionally awkward thing? Maybe it wasn't, but it felt awkward.
I think that dovetails for us into really the conflict with Buffy and the idea of Buffy as...
Well, no, sorry. You asked me as well about the other flashback, which was the singing flashback.
Oh, pardon me. Sorry. Yeah, I did indeed.
Yeah. So I that was really interesting. Obviously, it's what happens is that Anya gets stabbed through the chest by Buffy. I suppose before you should talk about that stabbing as well. But she gets stabbed through the chest and it goes to ad break, and when it comes back, and I do remember this happening, it's her singing. I found that really disconcerting. It's obviously a very body-ish moment, just after the credits in the body.
Blunt.
Where you have basically, I think it's right after the credits in the body that you have the
dream sequence where Joyce is okay. Is that you mean?
Well, no, I think it's the Thanksgiving sequence.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
And it's a very similar thing where it's very misleading for the audience in a really aggressive and very interesting way. And apparently Drew Goddard had originally intended for that to be Hush, a flashback to Hush, but he thought that it was too difficult to write these emotions of she doesn't have a self, she's defined by Xander, into still being lost into a voiceless episode. But I think this works really well. The musical aspect of it, I think it's really jarring. It's a very notable, bizarre element to this episode that works really, really well, I think. And I think it really elevates it, structurally.
Yeah. I think it gives a real sense of a through line of her experience, and that I suppose it really emphasizes that she has really been there as a fully actualized person in the background. Even in the background, even when people don't feel like that she is not necessarily the main character, which I think could be very heavy-handed, but I think she just carries it very well. And I think some of her scenes in this episode, like the conflict that in the internal conflict, she portrays the fear and the incredibly human and relatable grief she has at the end, where she's like, I don't know if there's anything left, so please just take this away and make it better. It's a real strength, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, you were saying about Buffy. Yeah, so Buffy in this episode is really interesting. So it kind of is a bit of a synecdoche of Buffy's issue in this season, is making hard decisions, and what do you do in a situation where you have the power to make a change, but it's awful, So obviously Buffy comes to the conclusion that she has to kill Anya. Xander argues with her, and excuse me. That's obviously a great interaction in itself, specifically because Buffy is saying, in a really interesting moment, apart from all the rest of the implications here, but she says, Angel was the love of my life, and I'll never love anyone the way I loved him, and I had to kill him. Which is really interesting to voice, because it's so true for Buffy, and it's not something that they actually communicate a lot, is that Buffy and Angel are the OTP. There's any alternative that they ever find is lesser and not as perfect, and that's really sad.
Yeah.
But so I really enjoyed that voicing. But then more interestingly, of course, is that Buffy says to Xander and Willow, "You two were cheering me on. You told me to kick his ass.
You gave me Willow's message
to kick his ass." Which, of course, refers back to Becoming Part 2, where Xander comes to help Buffy with Angelus, more likely, or more appropriately. And Willow has come back to consciousness after having been knocked out, and says to tell Xander to tell Buffy. She tells Xander to tell Buffy to wait, she might be able to get Angel's soul back. And instead of passing that information on, Xander says, Willow says to kick his ass.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the reason that like Buffy felt so alone after that and had to leave, is that she felt abandoned by her friends, and she felt like her
They
friends
wouldn't understand the loss and all that,
Exactly.
But then we have Willow here being like, I didn't say that, which
Yeah.
I think I can now crystallize is this is a moment I've been calling forward to for about 5 seasons, that there is a moment in season 7 where they acknowledge the disparity there.
The lie.
Yeah.
It's great, and it's a very well done moment. But yeah, and Buffy has to make this decision and has to go ahead with killing Anya. And yet at the same time she doesn't. I think we both kind of agreed when we were watching this episode that like Buffy will have remembered from season 6 what was it, further and older and further away, which is the episode in which Halfric traps them all in the house for Dawn's birthday. Halfric gets a sword through the chest and says, "Oh, that you'll need more than that to kill me."
Well, yeah, because they always do so many reaction shots on this show, and when Anya survives the stabbing through the chest, Buffy is like not surprised. Yeah.
So I don't think it was like while for the viewer like very much was communicated as Anya's just been killed. I think it's more metaphorical. I think Mark Field notes this, but it's a metaphorical killing of Anya's demon hood, because before the break she's in her demon face, and after the break she's stopped, which Drew Goddard also notes on the director's commentary, or the writer's the commentary for the episode. So I think that's quite a distinct interesting thing. And yeah, Buffy cool in this episode.
Yeah, I think the conflict between Buffy and Anya, as Buffy being really the supernatural law and her not having, like, there's not a lot of infrastructure or other people she can look to for guidance, because other people don't have the responsibility or the power that she has, and the tremendous burden that she carries through the whole show for that, of having to stand over these decisions. And I think her and Anya's fight is like similar to the fight with Willow, where it's like this is actually quite this is a good fight.
It was a good fight. It was good pitting against each other.
And I think we can't overlook as well that in that trio as well is that trifecta is Willow, and Willow has such an interesting role to play in this episode as someone who
she accidentally she's going back to college, and she's going to try and regain her life in a really kind of sad way. She looks so youthful and lovely in this episode, and so interesting.
Excited,
and she sees Anya doing this. She sees the blood in her hand. She's like, oh shit. So she then discovers the frat boys and finds the girl who Anya was venging, who was humiliated by these boys. We were worried for a moment that it was going to be a gang rape situation communicated, because I hadn't remembered it. It isn't, thankfully. It's just a breaking up thing. I was like, that would have been... It's interesting, because if it was such a horrific crime, then it would have in some ways complicated, like maybe Anya should have killed them. Yeah, but I think you need to get a clean kind of like that this was, because I think, but if anything, what she then did, like, okay, this guy brought a girl to a party and broke up with her in front of everyone as a like a cruel joke, like massively disproportionate reaction as well. I think that's part of it, is that like she has massively disproportionately reacted. But and then when Willow finds the girl and protects her, she has to do a protection spell and is really mean to the girl for a second because of the magical influence on her.
She goes a bit black-eyed, doesn't she?
She does. Her eyes go black for a second, and she says, like, shut up, you sniveling fool, or something. And that's quite upsetting and quite worrying. And it's a really good character moment for Willow, and it's a really interesting development for the implications of the rest of the season. I think it's really good. Yeah,
and her having that conversation with Anya, where Anya's like, who are you to criticize me for this? And Willow's like, I'm the exact person to talk to you about this, because I know what this is like. And really, I think all of them trying to work together to find a way to resolve that, and then Willow saying that she couldn't come with Buffy to kill Anya and all that kind of stuff,
and then also Willow holding back that Anya is the person who brought forward these spiders, because she knows that if Buffy finds this out, that she's going to have to kill Anya. Very interesting implications there, and very interesting dynamic, and quite a strong character moment again for Willow.
Let's talk briefly about the spider.
It was grand.
So no, the spider thing was scary, and I think
it was crazy inconsistent in the size of it.
Yes, it was. This spider itself was scary. The idea of it, I always found scary. The girl cowering in the closet and trying to take it back, and the spider still being there. the CGI where it actually interacts with the characters was so incredibly ropey. This is not an era where you can consistently have a CGI creature interact with a human. But when Buffy gets pinned down and it's puppetry at that point, it was actually really good puppetry.
Yeah, it was very clearly alien influenced because it opens its mouth and then a second mouth comes out that comes out to like steal your heart or whatever.
It's intralogial jaw.
Oh, really?
I was reading a bit about Alien recently. That specific jaw thing is
very interesting.
And it's obviously drawn from like real, like there's real creatures that have inner jaws.
Mostly insects, I'd have to imagine. So that's a really creepy, interesting little moment. It was pretty good. I liked it. Yeah, I didn't have any issues with it. Won't be going on my worst monster of the season. I
like it because like we get a few too many demons which are men with horns. I like a proper like monster.
Me too. I did, like that being said, I like that. Remember that slug demon from outer space in season 5 when that goes after Buffy's mom.
The Gaunt or the Gaunt or the Glorp or something.
Yeah, that was really non-human. I really hated that. Anyway, okay, so the other thing I think was worth noting is just, I would say like Xander, not really much to say there. He's a cunt. He's consistently an awful person, and he's an awful person this episode where he makes Buffy's life more difficult. He doesn't actually actively try to help anyone. He kind of just complains. He acts like he has ownership of Anya towards the end.
The first thing he says to Willow when the whole thing comes up is like, basically, what do you think you're doing, feeling you can't, how do you have the right not to tell us that it was Anya? And it's like, it's always immediately in with this energy. With no variation whatsoever.
Yeah. And then at the same time, at the end of the episode, he's consolatory and comforting towards Anya where he can be and not critical of her. But then again, maybe that's just because she's a human now. That's an important thing to know. Anya's now a human. Yeah,
so we have kind of like quite a... it's one of these things where it's like, how's she going to get out of this one? But it's quite a harrowing thing at the end where like the Hoffman punishes her by killing her friend in some tastefully green screened insertions of the actor who played Halfrick. But yeah, and that's like, what could he say to Anya that always never go for the kill and we can go for the pain, and like Anya now has to live with this. And there's something like quite like bittersweet about the fact that she makes this sacrifice and she lives as a human, but like it's only until the end of the season.
He says to her, he's like, how can I live with this? And he says, I wouldn't be too worried about it. From beneath you it devours. And to some degree the implication there is like, kind of like a foreshadowing of Anya dies at the end of the season. And then I would just say, I think, in terms of the title, we have two things going on there. Selfless being that Anya has no self. She's really lacking an existential core at the moment. She has to discover that for the first time without these crutches of destruction or aid or Xander or Olaf or anything. And then also Buffy has to be selfless. She has to ignore what she wants in the situation, which is to help Anya. And something that she's been trying to fight against is the idea that she has to kill a friend. And she has to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. So there you go. There you go. Take in terms of interpreting that title. I have talked so fucking much in this episode.
Yeah, Jesus, it's unlike you to talk all the time.
Okay, should we go into the dusting,
please?
Okay, so here's some Buffy bits for you. Apparently, they initially intended for the Swedish to be mostly gibberish in the episode, and apparently some of it still is, but the actors who did Olaf and obviously Emma Caulfield were both reasonably good, so they decided to go ahead with it. And they did actually more Swedish. So apparently with this song, which is obviously a callback to Once More Feeling, Drew Goddard asked Joss Whedon to write this for him. Joss Whedon said absolutely not. He was way too busy, and then the next day came along with the song, which is a good song. As in, when I was coming into the episode, I was like, I could still remember what the song was, which is a pretty good sign. Apparently, Sarah Michelle Gellar was only available for 3 days of shooting for this episode because it was her wedding to Freddie Prinze Jr. The hair that she has in the episode with the braid to the side, that is her wedding hair, and I think it looks awful.
I think we should specify. I think it looks bad in this episode in the context. I'm sure her wedding hair was lovely.
I'm sure she looked like angelic,
radiant, but like I don't think it works for this episode.
Yes. And this is the final appearance of both the Hoffman and Halfrick, naturally. So that's really interesting.
Don't worry, the Hoffman dies in I think season 9 of the comics when he tries to call up the Magic Council.
Okay, sorry. I suppose it's also selfless of Anya to reverse the situation and sacrifice yourself. Maybe that's her gaining a self by being selfless.
Reselfed. I'm sad Halfrig is gone. I like Halfrig. She's charming.
Yeah, me too. She's cool. But also, there's only 17 episodes left in the season, so we're not gonna miss her that much. Okay, do you have any Buffy bits for me there, Joe?
Yeah. So I what we didn't have cause to touch on at all is we have Spike briefly in this episode, and we actually do get an introduction, I think, of the first stuff interfering with him, because we see him. He mentions that he's seeing Drew. He's seeing Drusilla, and he seems to be in conversation with a very affectionate and forgiving Buffy, and then we immediately see that he's just talking to no one. So I think that's a lovely little introduction there. I thought the scene where Willow finds all the murdered frat boys was very reminiscent of the scene in season 2. I believe you said it was.
I think it's season 2. It might be season. I think it might be season 1 as you mentioned, but I think it's season 2.
Well, in the high school, she walks into a television room or a rec room in the high school and finds a load of murdered boys, primarily, and it's like horrified by that. So I thought it was a nice comparison that she finds this and is shocked, but she's much more capable in this scene than she would have been, say, 6 seasons ago. I have written down Oj equals Oj.
Okay, no, it's in Prophecy Girl. God, that episode's so good. But it's Cordelia and Willow find the AV club slaughtered by vampires.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I had that season 1 dark sheen to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was surprised and impressed in the episode how much the actual college stuff just stretches and stretches. You know, I'm amazed that we're still there in season 7 in any degree. Yeah.
That's true. Okay, and I'm afraid I wasn't able to take notes during the episode. Do you have any fashion notes for us, Joe?
I do. So in the opening scene, we have Willow wearing an utterly bizarre top, which is a glittery top that's covered in swords, and the swords are glittering.
Love it.
Dong is wearing like this kind of beaded red halter top kind of thing.
Dawn really appears very little in this episode.
She does, but she has some good lines when she gets out. Xander actually looks really well in the first scene, as because he's gone for a classic look. He's a decent haircut, a simple green t-shirt that fits him, pair of jeans. Yeah. Looks like a person. Do you know what I mean? Buffy is wearing like a polka dot stripe, like 3/4 length.
Polka dot stripe?
Like very, very, very thin stripes of polka dots within them.
Oh, Jesus.
Like a 3/4 length, like dress hybrid or something. This is why I don't do the fashion. She also is wearing, we notice she's wearing a big crystal necklace through the second half of the episode. Buffy is.
It's a really strong use of the word we.
You mentioned I think you said something about it. You said she was at her center of power or something. You make some reference to it.
No, I didn't.
Because I said it looked like a mini disc, and you said that's not what a mini disc looks like.
Oh, sorry, that's Willow.
No, I think it's Buffy as well. Maybe everyone was wearing crystals.
I think Willow was the one who was wearing the mini disc, but you said it's a mini disc, and I was like, no, mini discs are square.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I mentioned that Anya in the last scene has that kind of like, like when a very like pretty woman is like laundry day, going to
laundry
the gym.
day. Oh, I still look like a fucking $1 million.
Yeah.
She looks incredible. I really like the way Anya looks in this episode. Actually, just she's quite simple, dark hair. She looks just, again, like, and I don't mean to suggest that youth is the only determining factor of beauty or the only like positive attribute of women, even though I keep harping on about it.
It's on record. Yeah,
she looks really youthful and lovely and very it's really interesting. This episode really reminded me that these people are all like 22.
Yeah, shocking. And lastly, I think the Hoffring is the last time we see him in this episode. I think this is the only time we've acknowledged this, but looks almost exactly like our friend Ronan when he does cosplay.
Oh, it really does. Yeah,
because he exclusively dresses in purple, but very well designed purple cosplay. Although he probably wouldn't thank me for calling it cosplay, but yeah. It's
not cosplaying if you're not playing.
It's true. It's just going to work.
Okay, and then what we have next is the rating. Do you have a rating for me there, Joel? Sorry, no, death count first.
Yeah, death count first. So in this episode, we have all fraternity houseboys / Abercrombie & Fitch catalogue models, hearts ripped out by a grim slaw demon, reversed at the end.
Uno reverse card.
An unidentified man in the forest, his heart is ripped out by a grim slaw demon. Unclear if he's saved or not.
Well, that's a great point.
the demon herself killed with a 1 in a million axe shot by Buffy.
Is that what it says on the Wikipedia?
No, I'm saying that.
Okay.
Because she does that whole Ripley and Alien Resurrection thing where she just throws it straight up and kills it. An unidentified Russian man immolated in a flashback to the Russian Revolution. And finally, dear old Halfrick burned, her soul burned to a crisp by the Hoffring.
Okay, Joel, do you have a rating for me?
Yeah. I will probably give this episode, I believe, 9.0 spider puppet interior jaws.
Okay, tell me more.
What's amusing you, Brian?
Nothing that you've ever said. Please tell me more.
No, I just enjoy it. It was just a good episode of Buffy. I think it's going to be right up there as in like probably one of the best episodes of season 7 that isn't about the first. Do you know what I mean? Like isn't part of that potential arc. I'm actually amazed. I'm kind of surprised how much we have before we get into the meat of the villain. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the latter half of the season really is a bit of a slog.
Yeah. So I enjoyed that. I thought it was obviously one of Anya's best episodes. Anya centric, really solidifies her as a character that I've grown to really love a lot more on this watch of Buffy. And I think that the pathos is there, the horror is there, and the performances are top notch. So I think we got everything in this one.
Yeah, I love it too. It's one of my favorite. It's definitely, I would say, almost certainly my favorite of season 7. We'll see when we get to conversations with friends, with dead conversations with dead people, and potentials. Potential, was that what the last episode is called?
The last episode is called Chosen.
So I'm not sure why I don't know that, but we'll see how we get to and how we feel when we get to those. This is definitely hugely up there for me, so I'm going to give it 9.2 Woodlow transmogrific spells out of 10.
I love your bravery.
Yeah, I know. It's also not a difficult word. It's transmogrific, like, you know.
Yeah, it's just a garden variety crossword, answer.
Yeah, so 9.2. I really like it. I really like the structure of the episode. I really like the emotional kind of weight of it. I think it works. All really hangs together really, really well. Not a bum note in it. I don't have any criticisms of it. I love the resolution of the lie from season 2. I'm a big fan. Really like it, this episode. Maybe 9.3. Yeah, I'm going 9.3.
9.3. Was it Winslow's transmogrific spells?
Woodlow's, Joel.
Grant.
You dope.
So Cordelia Chase.
Yeah, if you want to, I suppose.
I do actually, because I quite like this episode.
Oh, do you?
Angel, yeah.
I think it's bad.
I quite like it based on where we're at in the show. For a couple of reasons. This episode's supersymmetry is Freg centric. Freg, whom I love. And it basically deals with her, Freg, having a journal article accepted from a theoretical physics conference or something, and going back to her old alma mater and meeting with her then professor and being very excited to be back in the swing of things and talking about portals and all that. And the long and the short of the episode, I'm sure other things happen, and there's some stuff between Wesley and Lila about betrayal, and Connor and Cordelia about like weird sex that they're having, or I think they might actually kiss in this episode for the first time. But the meat of it is really that Freg realizes that it was this professor she used to be a TA for when she was a grad student who
threw her in,
who created the portal that had her sucked away to
Pylea.
Why can't I say that suddenly?
I was
trying to say paella.
We have a Pylea plant at the moment, which is a Chinese money plant, often known as, or a pepperoni plant, and I fucking love it so much. It's doing so well for me, and I love him.
Bringing wealth. And then she realizes there's a pattern of him consistently banishing, I think, exclusively women grad students who are better than him. And there's this really, really awful burn that you have a grad student, a TA who's been with him for 5 or 6 years since Fred was originally there. And Fred's like, well, obviously he's kept you on because you're not very good. And like she's not threatening him. So that all stuff is interesting enough. And I love the mix of like theoretical physics and demonology and portalology and spells and all that. I love where that intersects. And my understanding is I've read that the theoretical physics, and from what I could pick parts of it as well throughout the episode, was actually quite accurate for the time, as opposed to just like nonsense.
Yeah, but I mean, like at the same time, it was kind of just saying string theory, eh?
But even so, like we've heard much worse things. True. And then the kicker of the episode is that Fred decides that she's going to kill the professor.
Yeah.
And
Gunn says basically, don't, you'll lose yourself.
Yeah.
Angel is doing stupid, funny stuff throughout the thing. Like, it's,
I think at some point in this, Angel may have been hexed or something. Something happened to him.
I don't know. We watched it like 2 weeks ago.
Something to mean that he couldn't just come in and vampire his way out of it. And it ends with instead Gunn killing the human professor, throwing him into the portal to save Fred from having that burden, and this being the dissolution
of their
relationship. So yeah, I would probably give this, for me, probably a 7.
Instead, she's like, no, I'm going to fall in love with a baby murderer, or an intended baby murderer.
No, I'm going to actually say nursery 6 failed feminist gestures. Because I think the central premise is perfectly good for a Monster of the Week episode. I like the focus on Fred. What drags it down is just, again, the amount we were talking about Connor and Cordelia and that kind of peripheral stuff, and Wesley and Lila just being like, whatever.
Yeah.
And Wesley clearly being ready to come back to the gang, but artificially being like, oh no, sorry, I have to go back to my apartment, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, 6 failed feminist gestures.
Yeah, I was gonna go for 6 failed feminist gestures as well.
Great.
And I mostly agreed with you there. I don't love the resolution of the, like, Gunn being like, no, I'll kill him instead, and then throwing him in the portal. In the sense that, like, it makes a difference. Like, Fred killed him. Like, well done.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make sure Fred didn't kill someone, then maybe save him rather than just killing him yourself. It doesn't, like, the distinction without use. What's that phrase? No, whatever. I didn't care for it. But yeah, 6 I think is more than enough failed feminist gestures for this episode.
Great. So let's leave it there for this week and wrap it all up in a tight little Buffy Boys bow.
Oh, they're going to talk about bandages. That would have been appropriate.
Yeah. So thanks so much for joining us. And we're happy to be back with you. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell your hands, and appreciate them. Appreciate them for all they do for you, if they do in fact do anything for you. And we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
We'll see you there. Goodbye.